now we have a whole panel on crypto and the financial markets and what role crypto is playing in the financial markets, what's to come in the future. And delighted to have the panel come out with our moderator from CNBC, Mackenzie Sigalos. Mackenzie, welcome. And our panelists include Tom Farley, a Georgetown alum, Georgetown parent, served on our Georgetown board, a great friend of the Psaros Center ever since his days as president of the New York Stock Exchange. And then next to Tom, we have Stu. Stu is the chief legal officer at Ripple. And Ripple Ubri has been a great friend of the Psaros Center, as I was mentioning in my opening remarks. And next to Stu, we have another alum, Sandra. Sandra is a double Hoya, undergrad and master's degree from Georgetown. And Sandra runs the blockchain and digital assets, all those initiatives at the World Economic Forum. Delighted to have you, Sandra. Dan Gallagher, well, first of all, Dave LaValle. Dave, another wonderful alum who helps us in so many different ways and has had quite a career from traditional finance to Grayscale and running ETFs at Grayscale now. And then we have Dan Gallagher, who's been a great supporter of the Psaros Center for 20 plus years. Dan, the first time when you were SEC commissioner, and we did some stuff on proxy voting and power of shareholder rights and all of that in New York, and you spoke there. So Mackenzie, I'm going to hand this over to you and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So our panel is indeed about crypto and the financial markets, but before we can get there, Stuart, you and I were talking ahead of this, and you said, you don't get to robust crypto market infrastructure without getting some permission from regulators first. And I've spoken to so many people in the industry, and the consensus is this November election is decisive for the crypto industry, in large part because you have one candidate who's promising to unseat the SEC chair, who many in the industry view as having been hostile to the sector more broadly. And I guess my question is, looking toward November, and I have a few questions on the election, but specifically with that top line on the ticket, how important is the presidential election this cycle to the longevity of the industry?
So, thank you. Ripple has always been a compliance-first company, and we've been around for 12 years. And we have always engaged with regulators and policymakers, and we're doing it so again this election cycle. Both with the Republicans and the Democrats. We showed up at the RNC convention, we showed up at the DNC convention. We have met with the Trump campaign, we have met with the Harris campaign. Trump clearly, and the RNC clearly has been very vocal. You look at their platform statement from their convention, 16 pages, one paragraph, clearly on crypto, saying we're going to stop the US war on crypto and make the US the crypto capital of the world. The Harris campaign has not been so public, but privately, they have said that they are interested in hitting the reset button. So I do think that policy comes first, that policymakers in this country have to remove the impetus for unelected bureaucrats who are running these regulatory agencies to create policy through enforcement. And whether or not we get that through a Republican administration, a Democratic administration, or some combination of both, what is clear is that crypto is here to stay, and crypto has become a credible voice in the political conversation, and we need to be listened to.
I mean, Dan, you were inside the belly of the beast. You're an SEC alum. How are you feeling about the election this November?
Wasn't such a beast when I was there. It's a beast now. I accept the predicate. Yeah, look, I think Stu's exactly right, and I think it's binary. This election, if Trump wins, crypto wins. If Harris wins, Stu, to your point, whatever they whispered to you, take it with a grain of salt. Remember that reset button in Moscow too. Didn't really work so well. So I think one way or the other, it's going to come down to legislation. I do see a pathway to legislation, regardless of who wins the election. But it's sort of what happens between the election and the legislation, and legislation takes a long time.
Well, exactly. I mean, you guys got a Wells notice earlier this year, active litigation with the SEC. You guys won a suit against the SEC and paved the way for the first ever spot crypto ETFs here in the US. And so it is, as you said, so much of what's at stake is the interim between when you have legislation passed into law in the US and what happens between now and then, and what we might see from the SEC in terms of further legal action and repercussions, although there have been a spate of losses recently. Anyone else? We've been talking about, you mentioned that this is a binary, and I'm opening this up to the rest of the panel in terms of this binary of Trump winning being good for crypto and it being more troublesome, perhaps, if we see the vice president step into that role. My question around that relates to the fact that, really we have seen behind closed doors the vice president engage the community, really try to find out more. The most that we've seen from their camp is speaking publicly about being open to innovation and enabling that. We haven't heard crypto at all. Any feelings here? Do you want to weigh in?
Go ahead, Mr. Farley.
After you.
I'll make 2 points here. The first point is in the 3.5 years that we have been facing off and working constructively, mostly with the SEC, we have seen it go from a partisan issue to a bipartisan issue to a nonpartisan issue. And when things, in my experience, have become nonpartisan, it's the most bullish indicator. So I can't debate you on the binary nature of the outcome of this election, but I can say that our experience kind of functionally has been that it's a nonpartisan issue, and that feels like a really bullish indicator for me. The second point that I will make is a shameless plug for the center, which is to say that the overlap of policymakers and regulators and practitioners is precisely where we have to have these conversations. And 10 years ago, we were talking about equity market structure. And you want to know what? There was some really thoughtful dialogue that was happening here. Today, we're talking about crypto, not only on the crypto panel, but on every other panel here today. So it's having these conversations in a really honest and open forum that will allow us to, plot the path forward.
Tom?
I've been here a number of times. This, to me, feels like a tipping point. It's just so awesome to see everyone out there, so many young people and old people like me. Just thank you to people like Rena, obviously, but also Professor Angel, and of course, my good friend and his family, Mike Psaros. This is so cool. And as a Georgetown alum, I'm looking forward to being invited back, Mike, I hope.
Me too, Mike. Right?
I wish I could disagree with Stu and Mike and Dave. It'd be good theater. I kind of agreed down the line that it is binary. There's a lot of talk in our industry from pretty well-placed people. Oh, don't worry. If Vice President Harris wins, everything's going to change. But government and policy come down to people and incentives. And look, lover or hater, Senator Warren is amazingly effective, and she's most effective at controlling certain agencies. And the way she does that is controlling who goes in to run those agencies. So whether it be the CFTC or the SEC or the OCC or the FTC. And if you noticed, she came out real early and real hard for Kamala Harris for president. So this concept of, oh, President Harris wins and everything changes, I'll tell you one thing that I don't think is going to change is Senator Warren gets to decide who runs the SEC. And Senator Warren isn't interested in being helpful to crypto. She isn't interested in defining what is a security, what isn't a security, what is DeFi, what isn't DeFi, what can be done, what can't be done, how do we bring innovation in this country. She hates all of it. So I don't see anything changing in a Democratic administration. Could even potentially get worse, although that's certainly not my hope, and I'm not fear-mongering. But I just don't see things getting better.
Sandra, you kind of provide this wonderful international perspective, and I feel as though the SEC has not just become the top cop of crypto in the U.S., they've become the de facto authority around the world. I mean, it's really the agency that's holding all actors responsible. Arguably, Binance was not within the U.S.'s jurisdiction, and they settled with them to the tune of $4.3 billion. And so I guess my question to you is how is that being viewed on the world stage, the SEC's very aggressive role in policing the space?
Thank you so much for the question. I like being at the vantage point of the World Economic Forum where we're really seeing the trends globally. I think a lot of the companies that we work with are US based, and a lot of the companies here today are members of the World Economic Forum. So we're very in tune with what's happening in the US. We've had a lot of great contributions from Senator Gillibrand and Lummis and Congressman McHenry, and so they're really involved in our work. So we have a finger on the pulse, as well as folks from the SEC and from the CFTC. But what we're noticing is that across the world, it's actually much more advanced than it is in the US. And I think that a lot of the crypto companies that are based in the US are moving operations there. Like Ripple, I think most of their operations are actually done outside of the US more than here. And I think that those are some lessons learned that the US should be listening to, especially in this upcoming election. I think crypto has become an important topic. And we're studying kind of the leading economies that are focused on cryptocurrency, and it's the Singapores, the Hong Kongs, the UAEs, and all of them. And we're trying to be the forum that provides that regulation, provides that view of the world, so that the US can maybe see a little bit of a pressure point and try to become one of those economies that is leading in crypto. But also, hopefully for countries that are developing around the world, they can look at regulation and create something that's safe and leading to a good industry.
And I'm going to come back to that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just want to push back on the premise of your question.
Yeah.
I don't think the SEC has established itself as the leading regulatory voice on crypto around the world. I travel the world, as I'm sure everyone else does. I meet with regulators in Singapore, in the UK, in the EU, in Brazil, in Dubai. The SEC is not mentioned. And in fact, I think that this administration has done tremendous harm to the credibility of the organization as it looked when Dan served as a commissioner. That's my mom is here. So. Good. But think about it. They're a self-appointed cop on the beat. The statute has not. No law has appointed them the cop on the beat. In our case, they've been called out by a judge for not faithfully applying the law. In your case, they've been called out by a judge for acting arbitrarily and capriciously. In the debt box case in Utah, they've been sanctioned by a court for outright visiting a fraud upon the court. The question is not why are they doing what they're doing, is why do they still have their jobs? And I think the rest of the world has moved on. They recognize the value of the technology, the jobs, the tax dollars, the innovation that it can bring to the economy. And they want to create a framework where the technology can prosper while we protect consumers, protect the integrity of the market, and keep bad actors out. That's what they're interested in doing. And they have moved so past the US and so past the SEC. I worry that I don't know if we can ever catch up at this point.
So I want to continue on with one more question about the election, because I think what's so interesting about 2024 is the fact that crypto is a top talking point in a way that it hasn't been before. And that also coincides with the fact that the industry, between corporations and individual donors, has raised $190 million. Nearly half of all corporate money raised this cycle is from the crypto industry. And unlike 2022 and unlike 2020, this is not exclusively coming from one person in one organization. I'm talking about SBF and FTX. This is coming from a very robust lineup of people across the sector. My goodness, Ripple is one of 4 major companies comprising the Fair Shake super PAC, which is pro-crypto, and it's bipartisan. And so you're also an individual contributor, and it's just been incredible to kind of go through these FEC filings and really see the industry show up in force, and not necessarily for one candidate. It is up and down the ballot on both sides of the aisle, and crypto has made, as an industry, has made itself impossible to ignore this election cycle. Stuart, you personally have skin in the game. Any thoughts about what conversations you're having behind the scenes about why it's so important to spend this much this year?
Yeah, well, I think it's sort of building on the first question, and whether it's the binary nature of the election, or at least making it clear that crypto is not a flash in the pan, that it's not made up of criminals and bad actors. It's made up of entrepreneurs and companies that have invested years in this country. Ripple is 12 years old. Coinbase has a long history. Grayscale has a long history. Robinhood has a long history, that we're not going away, and we're going to have a voice. And the way your voice is heard in this town and across the elections is through campaign finance, which is why Ripple has donated $50 million to Fairshake for a total of $190 million to be pro-innovation and to speak out for candidates who are pro-innovation and to send a message to those who want to villainize this industry and what we are trying to do, that there will be a price to be paid at the ballot if you do that. I think that on both sides of the aisle, mature politicians understand that that's how the game is played, if you will. And I think it helps build the credibility of the organization. And crypto is having a moment in this political cycle. And I think a large part of it is not only through the victories in the courts, but it also through the investment that we have made in the election.
So let's talk policy, because I feel like so much of what's going to push this industry forward from the conversations I'm having is getting institutional investors, firms, like actually in the game. And you had the first step, I mean, and you can definitely take this from me, like with these spot ETFs. Tom, I'm going to come to you after, like obviously, you know, former NYSE president, so you've straddled both worlds. Kick me off with what you're thinking about where we bring more.
I would say that, you know, building off of what Stu just said, that yes, our lawsuit brought forth the opportunity for, you know, spot Bitcoin ETPs to be brought to market, which is an incredible inflection point for crypto for a number of different reasons. Most of the time, exchange-traded product innovation allows for the democratization of an asset class that goes from institutions and then it moves into, you know, the retail sector. We had a funny thing where there was kind of a barbell nature of crypto, which is you had, you know, retail enthusiasts and some of the largest, most sophisticated institutions in the world. And so the democratization almost kind of, you know, compressed inward to allow for everybody across the investment spectrum to voice their opinion. They voice their opinion with their dollars and their investment. And you can't even, you know, it would be off the chart to try and, you know, look at the success by any measure you want to take a look at the exchange-traded products that came to market on January 11th. Number of issuers, volumes, AUM, inflows, net new assets, any way you want to look at it, it was an absolute monumental success. And what I would also say is that, you know, as you take a look at lots of different very large institutions have had outsized and outvoiced positions on crypto. And, you know, Jamie Dimon will be here later today. He had long been a naysayer on the product, but I can tell you one of the first firms that was in line to be an authorized participant for these Bitcoin ETPs was JP Morgan. And so there are massive institutions that are bringing credibility to the marketplace that are allowing every retail investor and the largest institutions in the world that represent retail investors to be able to invest with confidence and bring credibility to the market. And that's the inflection point. It wasn't just our lawsuit, but it was actually bringing the financial products to market to allow investors to invest with confidence.
Tom, I'm going to come to you on this one. I've been going through these 13Fs, and the kinds of numbers that you're seeing are still pretty tepid, right? And if you have, what, $400 million that Goldman has across a couple of the spot Bitcoin funds, that's more representative of what their wealth management clients are asking for. And so I feel like we're still seeing institutions stay on the sidelines. And so, you know, what I want to come to you on is, what is it going to take to, like, open the floodgates? Is it Fit 21 passing? Like, do we need, like, hard and fast rules, a market infrastructure bill passed into law for institutions to feel comfortable? I mean, of course, there are certain, you know, barriers that have to, you know, SAB 121 roll back. There are a lot of dynamics at play here. But tell me what it takes to get institutions feeling much more comfortable jumping in.
I'm cutting you off for the second time. I'm going to push back on your premise. $50 billion in Bitcoin ETF assets in 7 months is insane. And
it's stagnated. It's pared back. Like it
has not. Listen, by any measure, the inflows into Bitcoin ETFs across the broadest range of investors, institutions need to diligence these products. They need to diligence the asset managers. They need to diligence.
Yeah, and Morgan Stanley's opened up its fleet of 15,000 advisors. They're the first. We're still waiting for more wirehouses to do that.
That's my point.
Yeah.
So the fact that there's $50 billion in assets.
Down from, I mean, it's down 16 billion from its peak, but I hear your point. It's a combination of, like, token prices and also people, like, net outflows.
I mean, I think it's.
We're at 17 billion in terms of, like, total flows
net
so far.
New assets. into an asset class, 17 billion in 7-8 months, is absolutely off the charts by any
It took 10 years for a gold ETF to reach that level.
More than
10
that,
years.
yeah.
But go ahead.
But go ahead, Tom, I'm sorry. I won't cut you off again, I promise.
Are you going to fight me too?
Do you have anything else?
No, go ahead.
I agree with Mac. 50 billion it's nothing. It's de minimis. And frankly, all of crypto is de minimis. It's a rounding error. I think it's 2.5, 3 trillion. There are no institutions in any meaningful way in crypto, by and large. I'm speaking the rule of by and large. Yes, to Dave's point, are institutions getting involved in issuing ETFs? Think BlackRock, yes. But in terms of holders and it becoming ubiquitous, institutions and insurance companies, pensions, endowments, holding Bitcoin, God forbid, something other than Bitcoin and crypto, it just is. It isn't happening. It isn't happening anywhere. And when firms tell you, oh yeah, we have tons of institutional clients, what they really mean is they have a lot of trading firms, and then they have, Franklin Templeton sprinkles in $10 million of their gajillions of dollars under management into crypto. So that's my view. I agree with your premise. I wouldn't even say it's the first inning. It may be the second pitch of the top of the first inning. Why is that, though? It's predominantly two things. One, and there's some blame to go around for the industry, but there were a lot of charlatans in this industry if you go back 7 or 8 years. Really, what is this promise about? It's about programmable finance, but yet it became somehow about monkey drawings and frog coins, and scoundrels like Sam Bankman-Fried. So that's one issue. I do think that's being cleaned up to some extent, but it can only be cleaned up so much because of the second problem, which is it's scary as shit to do business in crypto in the United States. If you're an audit firm and you take on a crypto firm, the PCAOB is going to call you out and they're going to inspect you. The federal government shut down Silvergate and Signature. The federal government is telling every single big Wall Street bank, do not even think of getting involved in crypto in any meaningful way other than maybe being an AP in a registered product like a Bitcoin ETF. And as the US institutions go, the world's institutions go. So we need a less scary environment in the US where the rules of the road are clear, embrace the innovation, and then the institutions will come in. I'll give you one anecdote as we sit here at Georgetown University. We have a great head of our endowment here at Georgetown University, and he used to engage with me seriously about, hey, maybe we should consider an allocation in Bitcoin. Now, that's not something that happens overnight, but at least the consideration had come about. That's over now. I haven't had that conversation in kind of 3 years because it's just not a hospitable place to do business, and so people don't feel warm and fuzzy about jumping in.
Dan, you guys have the advantage of being highly regulated.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about what's needed in order to, better legislate around the space, better?
Got to snap out of it. I was just enjoying this back and forth. I forgot it was on the panel.
I missed your voice. That's why I went to you. Sandra, you're next.
Yeah, here I go. I agree with. I have no opinion on what inning it is, what pitch it is, anything regarding your industry. I have no reason to doubt you that it's coming. We love it because we play both sides of the game. We're a brokerage firm, right, that happens to have crypto. So the ETFs are performing very well on the platform, and the spot crypto at the same time is also performing well. So we love to see it. We just view it as optionality for customers. I do think it raises interesting questions down the road of like how important are the spot crypto markets, because the ETF is a very functional product, and for tax reasons, other reasons, folks might migrate there the more that you guys turn into ETFs. So I think that's a good problem to have. And again, we're hedged fully at Robinhood, so I love that. I think on the regulatory policy side, as I said, and I'll say tomorrow, I have to testify in Congress tomorrow about this, that the current regulatory state is just unacceptable. And I agree with Tom. I think when Jay Clayton came in, when Mary Jo White left as chairman of the SEC, these markets were rife with fraud. Like, it was 90% fraud. These ICOs were fraudulent. There were a lot of miscreants. Then there happened to be the Stews and the Ripples and Coinbases, but they were outliers. There was just too much fraud for there to be any credibility. And I think I give Jay Clayton a ton of credit for cleaning it up. But by the time he left, there wasn't time, and I'm not going to weigh in on any of the decisions he made at the end of his tenure, Stu. I don't want to get you inflamed. But there was not time There was a way, but not time to set up a regulatory regime. And I argue this in my testimony for tomorrow. The Congress, in its infinite wisdom in '96, gave the SEC exemptive authority, Section 36 authority, there's other authorities, to craft regulation for situations like this. We did it with Reg ATS in 1998. Here you had all these alternative trading systems. What are we going to do with them? Somebody, I know Professor Angel cares dearly about this issue. They're not in the statute. They didn't exist in 1934. What do? Well, you use Section 36 and you craft a regime. And right now, I don't know how many ATSs we have, 50, 75 ATSs, all under that regime that was crafted by exemption. You could do the same exact thing. You could have done it for the last 10 years. You certainly could have done it before FTX. And you would say, come in and register if you're really, if you say it, you mean it, like we did at Robinhood, come in, register in exchange for that, keep books and records, let the examiners come in, we're going to ferret out fraud. They didn't do it, FTX blew up. And I think that's why they're not doing it now. To do it now is to admit that you should have done it before. And so they're instead using their enforcement division. It's a ham-fisted way to make regulation. These court cases are all over the place. They illustrate the need for legislation and regulation. So what should happen? They should do a Section 36 rulemaking. They should get something in place while they work with Congress, something else that Gary Gensler has not done. You, as chair of the SEC, you need to work with Congress to craft legislation. Lots of Dodd-Frank, there's little goodies throughout Dodd-Frank with the SEC crafted by Mary Shapiro, right? Because they worked with Congress. They said, we need this, we need that. If you're going to give us this, do it this way. That sort of thing. That's part of the job, and it hasn't been done. So getting legislation in place after an interim regulatory structure, I think, is what needs to be done.
Okay, so let's talk about that. You had Chuck Schumer say a few weeks ago that he was very confident that they would be able to pass a crypto bill into law this session. Do we feel good about Fit 21? Do we feel good about that actually happening? Do we feel good about the stablecoin legislation? Talk me through what the best case scenario is.
I'll jump on that because I think the other piece of the binary nature of the election is what happens in Congress, right? So the Senate is likely to turn Republican just based on current information. The House will probably flip the other way. And that's going to dictate a lot of what happens too. If Harris wins, but she has a Republican Congress, they're not going to put Gary Gensler in as Treasury Secretary, I'm pretty sure. So what's he going to do? Is he going to stay around the SEC? He could. He could pretty much stay the entire Harris term, first term, if he wanted to, just given the way that the tenure system works on the commission. Is he going to? I don't know, but he could, and so you should expect sort of more of the same. And I think, again, what happens with the Senate will in large part dictate which bill comes up. We have Fit 21 sitting there ready to go. We've got the Lummis bill on the other side. Which one's going to be featured? They're very different. They're both good in their own ways, but very different. So I do think the election is going to impact that greatly.
Who else?
Yeah, look, you've also have the Stabenow bill, right? So there's a lot of bills out there. I think there is a lot of talk and energy to get something done. Why that is, we could talk about. I think in large part, it's because of the crypto money that's flowing into politics. I think people realize that they need to get this right. I don't think we're going to see anything done between now and certainly during this session of Congress, certainly not during the lame duck. And then Dan's exactly right. It depends on what the makeup is going to look like post-election.
Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in? And Sandra, you have your eye on what's going on abroad, the EU's DLT pilot regime. It's my understanding that legal framework isn't really being used very much. But Stu, you brought up Singapore, and it's very, I don't know, heavy but thorough and helpful policing of the space. Walk me through who's doing it right abroad and what best practices could potentially be repurposed here.
Sure, and maybe also touch on your previous question about institutional adoption and retail adoption. I think it's really interesting. This is just anecdotal, but from an institutional perspective, our organization holds an annual meeting in Davos in Switzerland, and 4 years ago, which is not that long ago, there was nothing about crypto related, and typically I see a lot of those sessions or the topics that are there are typically guiding what people are talking about around the world, and there were a lot of crypto companies that were already in existence, but they were outside of the gates of the official content that was happening. Nowadays, not only are all our projects at the forum, they're involving all of the biggest crypto companies and crypto startups, but also all of the big institutional, traditional financial institutions are involved, and every one of our projects has 60 to 80 organizations. So when it comes to institutional adoption, it seems to me like they really care, and most companies are involved to try to be involved in this space. When it comes to retail adoption, in the US, it's only 20%, so 1 in 5 people. But in other countries around the world, if we're talking about India or Nigeria, in Nigeria, it's almost 45% of individuals are invested or have used cryptocurrency. And part of that is probably the regulation. And so I think we have a lot of US regulatory experts here that can comment on that. But around the world, the reason that we're focusing on different countries is because that's where we see the strong regulation coming from. We are actually publishing a paper that's coming out on October 3rd. Hopefully you can all read. It's focused on 9 different jurisdictions. It includes the United States just because it is an important economy, but truly the leading economies are other ones around the world, and that's one of the main reasons why for retail investment, it's much bigger abroad, especially in the APAC region, in the Middle East. And if we can take some tips from what they're doing over there, I think it would be beneficial.
Can I just give an example of how the policy meets the real world at our company? So I run an exchange called Bullish. Bullish owns CoinDesk, the media company, and among CoinDesk properties is Consensus, the big conference that we host every year. Number one, Consensus, which has been in the United States for many years, we're moving out of the United States. So it'll be in Toronto next year. Number two, we're launching a new conference with a budget of something like $10 million, $5 to $10 million in Hong Kong. Our largest offices are in Hong Kong and Singapore. We're reducing staff in the United States actively, and we haven't onboarded a single U.S. customer, even though we're permitted to do so in many of the largest states. So just to summarize, we're investing a lot in places that actually have clear regulations and transparency. And we're basically saying, we're just going to stay out of the US. We don't want to buy a lawsuit. 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 In my case, we had a transaction in front of the SEC that was unfairly, I'll say, just so as not to get a headline, but at a minimum, unfairly killed by the SEC. So, you know, it is hurting the US. You're not seeing the kind of development, investment, innovation that you otherwise could have. And look, my company is a prime example of that.
Real quick.
We have the same story.
Bitstamp acquisition, you just triggered my triggered the thought. How's that going?
It's not closed yet. It'll close Q1.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to get that integrated, and we got to work through now various regulatory regimes. One quick point on this too, which is interesting perspective. If I had a nickel for everyone who told me that they were going to take their business offshore, whatever the business was. When the Volcker rule came, everyone was taking their business offshore. They didn't, right? I would have retired from the commission with all my nickels. This is different. This is radically different. We met at Robinhood about 1.5 years ago. We had a meeting with our board where we talked about the climate in the US, and we walked out of the meeting deciding to go register in the EU. I mean, we want to be regulated. We've made that abundantly clear. It's not good. You said you're scared in the US. I think that was one of the comments. Yeah, you're looking over your shoulder the whole time. You're doing everything right as we did at Robinhood and still getting a Wells notice? Like, come on.
Yeah, and
This is real.
Yeah, and Dan, you and I were talking earlier, and you said that, like, in terms of where policy is going, the instinct will probably be to replicate what equity markets, what's already going on in equity markets. We're going to put the policy question to bed because I've only got 5 minutes left before students have the chance to come up. So please think of your questions. And with those 5 minutes, I'd really like to hear about, what's next for the sophistication of the crypto markets within, like, in the U.S. Given all of the constraints we've just been talking about. I'm looking at you, Dave.
Sure.
Because, like, the thing is that people are like, oh, are you? What new? Some people are curious. Is Solana the next thing that we're going to put in an ETF wrapper? But really, what's more interesting to me me is like, we've got these spot crypto products, we've got the future crypto products here. Obviously, globally, you've got like a whole lineup of spot ETPs. SIBO putting in an application for options. What we really need in order for the market to become more sophisticated and for institutions to want to get involved is for there to be the ability to, have hedges and leverage and play off volatility. So how do we build out a more exciting infrastructure around the products that already exist to make this compelling enough for institutions to get skin in the game?
Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, Dave.
So the first thing that I would say is everyone rushed to the success of the Bitcoin launches and really kind of hustled over the reality that the entire industry came together and it actually worked. There's a number of innovations that happened on a micro level, and not only the issuers, but the exchanges and the indexers and the market makers and the APs and the institutions all showed up, and it actually worked. And it was pretty complex because they were doing things that had never, ever been done before without getting into the weeds of it. So my answer to the question is advancement of just that. So let's just take data. I'm going to go through everything, but let's just take data. It's really easy to create an index on an equity, be basket of equities, because you take the 4 p.m. close at the primary listing exchange and you multiply it times the weighting and you add them all up and you have a NAV. And that's just not the way it works with crypto. You've got assets that are trading 24/7. You have hundreds of different venues that are bringing high quality liquidity. And so let's find a way to enhance the ability for the entire marketplace to have a high degree of confidence in the prices they're executing against. That's the first thing. So just like enhancing the data. If you enhance the data, then all of a sudden maybe you have a higher degree of confidence that you can more adequately and more efficiently and price options with a greater deal of confidence. So I think all those financial products and the confidence with which institutions can engage with them are really going to be on the backbone of having high quality data. And a real high confidence around that. So I think infrastructure is what's next.
And Stu, Ripple has been branching out into custody, into stable coins, really trying to look to the future in terms of how you can be a one-stop shop for institutions. Walk me through that.
So our core product has always been cross-border payments, using blockchain and crypto to help traditional financial institutions move money faster and more cheaply and more transparently than they can. We realized that to be the one-stop shop, we need to also provide the custody solution and a stablecoin, which can be a proxy for any digital asset that you want to use on the blockchain to make that happen. So we're going all in on all three pillars. And part of it also will become the tokenization of real world assets. And I think eventually, and that is getting a lot of traction outside of the US in all of the jurisdictions that Tom talked about, all of the jurisdictions where we have customers, and hopefully when this regulatory cloud is lifted and we get some policy clarity in the US, we will then be the most trusted source for enterprise support for crypto solutions in the US.
Tokenization has gone through all these hype cycles, but my goodness, it seems to be having a moment in a real way. Tokenization of equities, when are we going to get 24/7 trading? Or what excites you about tokenization? And then I'm going to pass it over to the students.
The thing I'm most excited about is actually kind of what Stu's talking about, which is the use of blockchain technology to affect payments. So anything, there's stablecoins are a form of tokenization, tokenized money markets, basically tokenizing finance so that finance can be affected in a more efficient, more cost-effective way than it currently is.
Whenever someone comes up to the mic, I'll grab them. But in the meantime, that's something that I am curious about. Because yes, you can tokenize money market funds, but at the end of the day, to be compliant with broker rules, you're still going to have to keep a shadow copy of your books. So when you get a more pure application of blockchain tech in the TradFi world, or does that never happen? Do you always kind of have to have a shadow system to be compliant?
And until you get regulatory relief, you need the shadow system. But it's there. It's begging for regulatory relief, right? If you saw the Paxos no action letter that Chair Clayton's Trading and Markets issued to Paxos, it was a tiny little experiment within the world of tokenization, but I think it illustrates pretty clearly you can tokenize NMS equities. You can trade them on a blockchain, right? We need to do that without the shadow ledger, without all of the 17A requirements of DTC and the broker registration. I'm not saying without the protections, and maybe not even without the involvement. You can have DTC involved as a validator, something like that, right? But the current system is old. The banks love it because they sit on the DTC board and that's, their 60s mainframes run it and they don't want to change it and it needs to change.
But it's not, It's not going to happen with this administration. It's just not, which is why I'm not over the moon excited about it. But if there was an administration that wanted it to happen, you can do it in a responsible way.
That's right.
And maybe I'll just comment on the tokenization bit as well. That's actually the first way I got into blockchain was at my last job at the World Bank, and we tokenized a bond and put it on the blockchain, which was very exciting. It was the first bond ever to do that. But again, we still had to, the legal registrar was not on the blockchain, so we had to have two systems in place. And I think only with scalability and only with better regulatory requirements can we actually achieve that.
Great. Please, I'd love to hear your question.
Folks, I appreciate y'all's attendance and contribution. In theater, certainly Dave. So my question is going to deal with the politics, the grand strategy, and a few specifics. So being that you guys are leaders in this space, how do you see the U.S. integrating or managing how crypto and the U.S. dollar are going to move forward, given that the U.S. sees the crypto world as a challenge to the U.S. dollar dominance?
So,
Go ahead.
look, I don't see crypto as a either or in terms of U.S. dollar and the predominance of the U.S. dollar. I view it as a supplement to and an asset for better financial markets, and I think the two can live together in parallel, if not in harmony.
I mean, the Trump camp is arguing that the proliferation of U.S. dollar-pegged stablecoins is actually enshrining the power of the dollar on the world stage to make it more accessible. A lot of countries don't have dollar access, and they'd like to. Great question.
In the absence of another question, I'll make one more.
Cut that mic, please.
Stu's mom.
I'll keep talking. Professional Angel's going to hit us with one. I would just say that if I could say one more point about proliferation of crypto, there's 30 trillion in advised wealth in the U.S. market, and having this inflection point of having an exchange-traded fund available to those firms once they're onboarded, and the reality of 80 trillion in wealth that's going to transfer through one generation to the next as baby boomers kind of move on and pass their money down. Crypto is going to be part of that conversation. And that is also another, I think, topic that is what is going to be the future of crypto, is how that's going to be allocated and where people are going to put in their portfolios.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jim.
The proposed stablecoin legislation in Congress will give issuers a choice of around 55 different regulators to choose from at the state and federal level. Is that how we should be regulating stablecoins?
No.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that one.
Isn't it funny, right? Dodd-Frank was supposed to clean up the alphabet soup of regulatory agencies, and they went in, they got rid of one and added 3, I think, in Dodd-Frank. So you have your choice. But no, that's far from the regulatory certainty you need, because you can't tell me the other regulators won't still be vying for some power over the stablecoin.
So our time is up. Thank you so much to the panelists for sharing your time, and to Georgetown for having us.
Thank you, sir.